Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Today's part 2 of a little quilt that I put together called the Bullseye quilt. In the last video, I'll leave the link below of how you can see how I put these blocks together. This is how I quilted it. I put the binding on, and then to get the raw edges to do what I wanted them to do, I needed to wash and dry it, and it turned out great. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'll bring you along. That's what we're going to do today. Let's get started. My quilt top is ready, so I went to my living room and I laid the backing down right side to the floor, and then I put my batting on top of that, and I put the quilt top on top of that. That is a quilt sandwich. I smoothed everything out, and then I just tried to get it to be around the right size, which I had to trim some of that backing and batting and I left about 2 inches all the way around. Then I went to my dining room table and I covered it with a plastic cover because I'm going to use a 505 spray adhesive to put my 3 layers together. I could use the floor to do this step, but I find it a little bit easier on my body to do it on the table, and I have to do it in sections. So I start with the quilt top side and I just spray the batting a little bit, and I smooth that quilt top on top, and then I move to the middle and then to the other side. After getting the quilt top nice and smooth on top of my batting with that spray, I turn the whole sandwich over and I do the same thing with the backing fabric. I'm going to start quilting my quilt, and I'm going to go right through my quilt blocks, but I need to do the border, so I marked it with a bamboo skewer and a ruler just to make a little indentation. They sell something called hero markers. You could use pencil, or you can eyeball it like I did later on in this video. And I started quilting in the middle of my quilt, and I went through all of the seams in my quilt blocks. After going through all of the seams in the quilt blocks, I decided to quilt diagonally through all of my quilt blocks, both directions. So in the end, I will have seams going through all the quilt blocks, and then I'll also have some long X marks going through the whole quilt, going both ways. After getting all of my quilting done, I took it to my table and I trimmed the edges. I chose some binding and I cut strips that are 2.5 inches wide, the width of the fabric, and then I will make a long strip of binding here by joining the ends. I set those ends together at a sort of a right angle, and then I'm going to sew from one corner to the other corner and trim that leftover triangle away. After pressing my binding in half, I'm going to attach it to the back of my quilt. This is not going to be hand sewn. If you want to do a little more work, you can put it on the front, roll it around to the back, and do a little blind stitch on the back. But I am going to attach this to the back of my quilt, and then I will roll it to the front. And when I get all the way around, I'll show you how I attach the ends of my binding together. And as you can see, I left a little tail that I did not attach. That's how we're going to get this binding together in the end. I think I left about 6 to 8 inches before I started sewing. When I get to the corner of my quilt, I stop 1/4 inch away from the end. I pivot, I sew off the corner of my quilt, and then I have a little angled seam right there. It's hard to see. And I turn my quilt, I fold the binding up, just straight up on that seam, and then I fold it down, straight down, right on that seam. And the fold kind of aligns with the edge of the quilt. And then I start sewing right on the edge of my quilt, and I'll do that on all 4 corners. When I get to the end of the binding on my quilt, I stop about 10 inches. I leave a 10-inch opening, and then I take those 2 tails and I fold them, and making sure they each have at least 6 inches each, because I'm going to be joining these. So I'll fold them and make sure the folds meet. So I cut one of those tails, and then the left side I will be measuring 2.5 inches. I'll make sure that tail is 2.5 inches from the right side, and I'll just use the little leftover binding as my guide because I know that that is 2.5 inches. And then I'll join them together just like I did when I was making that long strip of binding. I'll put the right sides together, I'll sew diagonally, and then I'll make sure that it is not twisted before I trim away my triangle. So I need to scrunch up the quilt a little bit to be able to work and do this step, but it's real easy to make your binding continuous, just like this. I've pinned down the binding. I'm going to finish that seam, and then all I need to do is roll it over to the front, over that raw edge, and I'll top stitch all the way around. My quilt top is all ready to go. I'm ready to put it in the washing machine and the dryer. This will be an adventure. We're going to see what happens to all those raw edges. And here are all those raw edges. They look really cozy. Some of the strings were a little bit long, so I went back through and just trimmed some of the frayed edges that just got a little too wild. This is a fun quilt. I love all the fun fabrics in this quilt. This will be a fun one to use. We will be using this one for sure. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.